The whistle cuts through the dawn like a blade. It is still dark. The air is thick with coal dust. Footsteps echo over wet stone. Coughing, always coughing. Doors slam open, others shut quickly behind tired bodies. No time for breakfast, no time for warmth. Inside the factory, the noise is unbearable. Iron teeth grind against iron, belts snap and recoil. The floor trembles. A boy reaches too far between the rollers. The machine does not hesitate. It never does. Above the smoke, Paris wakes to another morning of progress. Newspapers will celebrate innovation. Politicians will praise expansion. Investors will count profit. But down here, in the belly of the city, progress has a different meaning. This is working-class life in Paris in the 1800s. A century remembered for brilliance, art, and engineering triumphs, a city that would earn the name City of Light. Yet beneath the glow of gas lamps and grand boulevards lived another Paris, compressed, exhausted, invisible. The 19th century was not simply a period of change. It was a rupture. Work was no longer guided by daylight or seasons. It was governed by the clock. Time became measurable, sellable, punishable. Before the factories dominated the skyline, labor had a different rhythm. Artisans worked in small workshops. Families shared tasks. There was hardship, but there was control. Skill meant independence. Then came the machines. Steam power, first perfected across the Channel, promised endless production. Investors saw multiplication where others saw smoke. The logic was irresistible. Produce more. Produce faster, reduce cost, expand markets. Paris embraced the model. Workshops gave way to vast industrial halls. The old neighborhoods filled with newcomers from the countryside. They arrived with hope, steady wages, urban opportunity, a future built from iron and brick. What they found were overcrowded rooms and endless shifts. Entire families rented single damp spaces. Windows rarely opened. Sewage flowed in gutters. The smell of coal fused with the smell of unwashed bodies. Disease moved easily in such places. Yet the city above seemed unstoppable. The Seine carried raw materials from distant provinces. Railways extended outward like veins. Goods traveled faster than ever before. Ideas did too. Political pamphlets, socialist theories, radical dreams. Paris was more interconnected than at any moment in its history. That interconnection created wealth. It also created fragility. If a worker was injured, there was no safety net. If production slowed, wages vanished. Survival depended entirely on physical endurance. In textile factories, the air shimmered with microscopic fibers. Workers inhaled them for years. In metal workshops, sparks burned skin and eyes. Children were hired because their hands were small enough to clean between moving parts. Childhood shortened. Bodies wore down quickly. The transformation had begun far from the crowded alleys of eastern Paris. It started as an experiment in efficiency, a belief that mechanization meant progress without cost. But machines do not breathe. They do not tire. Humans do. The moment of contact between industrial ambition and human reality stood at the factory gate. That iron entrance separated two worlds. Outside, individuality. Inside, function. Each new factory created its own orbit. Housing clustered nearby. Small taverns thrived on exhausted customers. Debt became common. Dependence deepened. When demand rose, shifts lengthened. When markets dipped, layoffs were immediate. Whispers of resistance began quietly. A handful of workers refused entry. Others joined. Strikes formed not from ideology at first, but from desperation. Authorities reacted swiftly. Police dispersed gatherings. Barricades appeared in narrow streets. Furniture overturned, carts flipped. The elegant capital of Europe became a terrain of tension. Industrialists defended long hours as necessary competition. Many physicians of the era described fatigue as moral weakness. Poverty was blamed on character, not structure. When cholera swept through crowded districts, officials pointed to unclean habits of the poor. Few admitted that the very speed of urban expansion had created the conditions for contagion. Institutions strained. Churches preached patience. The state promised order. Meanwhile, winter winds cut through thin walls. Bread prices fluctuated unpredictably. Hunger was never far. And yet, something else was growing. Solidarity. Neighbors shared what little they had. Women formed mutual aid networks. Men debated politics in smoke-filled cafes. Words like equality and rights began to circulate with urgency. The city glittered at its center. The outskirts trembled. Paris was transforming into a modern metropolis, but beneath its brilliance, pressure was building, economic, social, moral. Not everyone would emerge unchanged from this new world of steel and steam. And the question lingered quietly in the background of every shift, every cough, every sleepless night. Was this progress worth the cost? Night brought no relief. After 15 hours of labor, the body collapsed before the mind could dream of rebellion. Exhaustion settled deep into bone. It passed from parent to child like inheritance. In the eastern districts, entire families slept in single beds. Ceilings leaked, walls sweated with moisture, rats moved freely between shadows. Yet this was called home. Industrialization did not remain confined to massive factories. It seeped into basements and attics. Women stitched garments by candlelight, paid per piece. The more they produced, the less each item was worth. Fingers bled quietly in dim rooms. Economic crises rippled across Europe without warning. When demand fell, orders vanished. Hundreds were dismissed overnight. There was no insurance, no compensation, only uncertainty. Desperation intensified organization. Secret unions formed. Pamphlets denounced exploitation. The language of class consciousness sharpened. Workers began to see themselves not as isolated sufferers, but as a collective force. This frightened those in power. Memories of past revolutions still haunted Paris. Any gathering could be labeled subversive. Leaders were arrested, meetings dispersed. Stability became the official priority. But stability for whom? As tension escalated, blame searched for targets. Foreign laborers were accused of stealing jobs. Religious minorities were portrayed as manipulators of finance. Prejudice flourished in times of scarcity. Fear transformed neighbors into suspects. Beyond the city limits, rural France felt the pull of industrial gravity. Young men and women abandoned villages for factory wages. Fields lost hands. Agricultural rhythms faltered. Some returned disillusioned. Others remained trapped in urban poverty. Around Paris, landscapes shifted. Open land gave way to improvised neighborhoods. Smoke replaced open sky. The countryside retreated. Eventually, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Epidemics spread beyond working-class districts. Contaminated water did not respect social boundaries. Mortality rates alarmed even the comfortable classes. Urban reform began, not purely from compassion, but from necessity. Wide boulevards were carved through dense quarters. Entire neighborhoods were demolished. The poorest residents were pushed outward, further from opportunity, further from visibility. The city grew more beautiful. It also grew more divided. Gradually, legal reforms emerged, restrictions on child labor, modest reductions in working hours. Incremental improvements fought for through protest and sacrifice. These were not gifts, they were concessions. The industrial century reshaped identity itself. The working class became a political actor. Trade unions solidified. Labor movements gained momentum. A new awareness took root. Workers were not merely replaceable parts. They were citizens. By the late 19th century, Paris dazzled the world with exhibitions, technology, electric lights. Tourists admired architecture. Artists captured elegance on canvas. But beneath every grand facade lay the memory of calloused hands. Progress had been built on endurance. The cost was rarely recorded in monuments. It lived in shortened lifespans, in chronic illness, in generations who knew little outside factory walls. And yet, from that hardship emerged something enduring, the foundation of modern labor rights. Today, when we walk through cities illuminated at night, connected by transport networks, driven by innovation, it is easy to forget the first generation that absorbed the shock of mechanization. Comfort was not born gently, it was negotiated, fought for, paid in fatigue and blood. The story of working-class life in Paris in the 1800s is not simply a chapter of industrial history. It is a reminder that every technological leap rearranges human lives. We like to believe we have moved beyond such imbalance. That regulation and awareness protect us now. But new machines continue to appear, new forms of labor continue to emerge, and once again, the question surfaces beneath the surface of progress. Who carries the weight of transformation? History does not whisper this question, it repeats it, and if we listen closely to the echoes rising from the factory floors of 19th century Paris, we may recognize something uncomfortably familiar. To understand the present, we must keep walking through the smoke of the past. Because every era believes it is advancing, and every era leaves someone behind.